Welcome to Breaking the Silence, the podcast where faith meets business and purpose drives performance. I am your host, Junia Clovis, and every week we dive into real conversations with bold believers making waves in the marketplace. Welcome to Breaking the Silence. I'm your host, Junia Clovis. Help me to welcome my guest today, Mr. Franklyn Butler.
Junia, it's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome. How are you doing? I'm so excited about today.
I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here on this first episode of your podcast.
Listen, I am ecstatic to hear what you have to say today. I am ecstatic. So let's just dive into it. Tell me, give me a little bit of your background, when you were a child, your childhood. Give me a little.
Yeah, so I grew up, as I would say, as an ordinary child. Certainly, coming from a legacy family as a butler. The reality is you really never appreciate your foundation until people tell you about it, right? So for us, it was very ordinary. Obviously, grew up with my mother and father. Really, one of the key things that I can tell you was an important part of our foundation was obviously this notion of having a relationship with God, growing up in a family where you had to recognize the importance of hard work and humility.
Right.
My father always used to remind us that, people think you better than them. But he say, listen, you ain't better than nobody, but you're different.
Right.
And so we always grew up, Junia, with this notion that we were always different. And different for us meant that he always meant that we had to have a standard in life, right? And a standard in the context of one being hardworking, in the context of integrity, within the context of, you had to put your best foot forward in terms of school and education. We were always involved in a ton of extracurricular activities that included swimming, that included singing in the choir. We were obviously in church and youth ministry and choirs at church as well as at school. So always lived a very involved kind of childhood. And so, I'm just always so grateful. Even today in the marketplace, I always remind people, let me tell you what my daddy used to say, right? As a way of, in some ways, honoring him, right? And I would see that as quotes that he would often share with me that today are things that I lean on.
Okay.
In terms of, how I, lead an organization or any type of circumstance, I often draw on his wisdom in terms of, how it is. And what I have found over time is a lot of these quotes that you would have that your parents or grandparents teach you, the more you get to know the Bible, you understand that they're often biblical, right? And so that foundation, I think, has been very important in my life and in my journey. Even to the point now where, I got a daughter, 6 years old, married to Junia Butler, my wonderful wife. And I think I find myself repeating the same things. Okay, what are those sayings that I was taught? Yeah. And I find myself instilling them in my daughter or often referring to them to make sure that she too recognizes her foundation, right? Is, even, simple things. Everybody who went to St. Anne's School knew two things about the Butler boys. One was we can get to school early-ish, I would say. And two,
early-ish.
We can be in the car till devotions finish.
I can tell
because my dad would make sure that before we leave the classroom, we would do our 4 day by day, read our scriptures. And even if that meant us being late, everybody in the school know, listen, they're here, but they ain't quite here yet in terms of the classroom. And so those are the same foundations that even now with my daughter at 6, we try to make sure that she understands that. We try to pray together, recognize that you got to get your day off to a good start. So, it's amazing how these foundational lessons that you learn as a father, as a business person, really come out as you get older and more mature.
Right. That's interesting. But there's a question for you. As the CEO as the chief executive for Cable Bahamas, how do you go with your day by day spreading the gospel, but not being so in the marketplace?
So I would say this to you. I don't know if you ever set out to spread the gospel in the context of what I would call evangelizing in a very overt way. I mean, if you listen to what Jesus did, whether that was with the taxpayers, his first thing was about collecting a relationship, period.
Exactly.
And once you start to develop a relationship with people, and I think only recently have I been much more intentional when the environment is right, when somebody challenges me around, hey, listen, I'm in the workplace, I'm making good money, but, I don't want to be a slave to this thing. I always tell them, I said, listen, work is a form of ministry if
Mm-hmm.
you know exactly what you're doing. Because ultimately, the workplace is no different from the church in this
No.
way, that the same people who are in church are the
It's the same
people who
people
you're
work.
working with, right? And
Mhm.
so people always talk about the politics in the church. Well, the politics in the church is the politics of life, because we, as much as we may try to segregate our different aspects of life, we are who we are, whether we're in church or whether we are in the workplace. And so for me, I don't know if I set out to evangelize or I set out to uh, preach ministry, but I'm very intentional in my thinking around, if that's leadership, if I'm thinking about the organization, what is our purpose?
Right.
And these are foundational elements of life,
Mm-hmm.
which if you have a spiritual upbringing, you have an appreciation for. And so
I
I don't
agree.
know that I set out to necessarily make it about ministry or make it about my Christian walk as much as it is just who I am now.
Right.
And often to the other person, they don't recognize necessarily that I'm trying to bring them to church or bring them to read the Bible, but often I'm trying to give them some examples
Right.
through my own life lessons or through the notion of what is their purpose. And are you doing this job because you're trying to please me, or are you doing this job because you have a standard for yourself?
Exactly.
And oftentimes people's standards are often connected, one, to their upbringing, or
Mm-hmm.
two, and I say this foundationally in the context of Bahamians, in the context of your church upbringing.
Right.
And oftentimes we see these as often segmented parts of our life, which quite frankly, I haven't found them to be so separate. I find more and more they are so much more connected, that only recently I shared with one of my executive colleagues that, listen, really, if you think about it, your life is about ministry. And ministry, often when you think about it in the context of leadership, is we, as leaders, we often see ourselves as serving others. And as a part of that service, we often see more in others than they often see in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question is, are you often prepared to be the vehicle
Right.
that causes those individuals around you to see their true potential?
Right.
And I would argue sometimes that's a combination of having to be the scapegoat, and that's usually through the accountabilities, that's usually through the leadership lessons that often are difficult.
Right.
And if you're not prepared to be that catalyst for others, then are you really positioning yourself for leadership? And I say that not in the context of necessarily seeing yourself as being better, but seeing your service to them as causing them to recognize, listen, if you don't quite achieve your true potential,
right,
are you really being the best employee that you could be?
Or are you truly fulfilling purpose?
That's the point. But often you frame it in the context of employees. And I always tell people, I say, listen, you may not get it here,
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't get it here, you will probably get it somewhere else. And sometimes causing you to get it somewhere else is a gift. That as a leader, I'm often prepared to allow people to get it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm trying to say they're not good enough, but sometimes if the soil ain't ready for the tree to be planted, sometimes you gotta invite them to go somewhere else where someone else could till the soil
and that is
to
so
make
powerful.
It true for the tree to be planted. And that is in whatever profession you're in, because that's been my experience, my journey. And I often, again, just to think back to histories, I always used to ask my dad, Daddy, how these people know you? Or, Auntie, how these people know you?
Know everybody.
And what I find more and more is because they live this life of leadership and serving others, oftentimes people knew them because they went through the doors of Milo Butler, right? And they have come back unequivocally. Most people come back and say, boy, your daddy, your uncle, your aunt, your whoever, they have been such a blessing to me and my family. I mean, I know of pastors even today who call me just to say, listen, man, I know what it is to work in the store on Blue Hill Road, or to have been a part of even cable or wherever it is that, any butler who has been in leadership or served, and they say, listen, thank you guys so much. And that is one of the things that, even though I lead Cable Bahamas, I always tell people, I take with me not only my Christian foundation, but also my Butler heritage into how we serve. Because I always tell people that Samilo was really about this notion of education and empowering of others, right? Mm-hmm. And that is a journey that you often have to take people on. Because sometimes people see themselves as getting the big job as I arrive. Or making this amount of money, I'm doing well.
And they forget humility.
Well, they forget humility, but sometimes they struggle with this idea, but there's got to be something else, because I didn't achieve what I thought I was going to achieve. It's like when you get the first degree or when you get married, like, oh, I arrived.
Yeah.
And beyond these things, it's like, okay, so now that I don't have this degree, I don't have this job, then what? What is purpose calling me to do?
That's true. Now, where you just said that, that's powerful for me because I often meet young women and I talk to them. They ask me about business tips, they ask me different things. And the hardest part is when they ask me things like, how do you bridge the two? It's very hard to balance the two, Christianity and business, because I understand all of your foundations, but see, with you, you had the foundation where your family taught you the two. Whereas we have some people out here who don't have the balance of the two, but God has put purpose on their life to now walk into business.
Yep.
Okay. So now, what would you say to a young woman or a young man, and how to bridge or bring the two together that you were taught from your legacy and also your spiritual?
So I would always tell people that, the Bible lessons of 2,000 years ago are still the same today.
True.
And I see that in the context is that, listen, any challenge that you're experiencing, whether that's combining your Christianity with business, that has been a challenge of many centuries now.
Right.
And for us, I will tell you, the first bit of advice I tell any young business person is go and find an example of somebody you admire who is living the life that you want to live. Then secondly, don't be afraid to go and ask them. And that could be locally, that could be internationally. Then go out and ask them.
Right.
Give me some pointers. Help me to think through what it is that I want to be able to do, and how do I get from point A to point B. Oftentimes people think that this is some exact science or some magic pill that you just figure out. And quite often what I found is it boils down to scriptures. Write the vision and make it plain. And oftentimes we got these visions in our head. God tell us we can be an entrepreneur and we could do this, but we never sit down and write the vision to make it plain. And then once we write the vision to make it plain, the question is then, what's the how? And the how is simply recognizing that quite often you got to do your market assessment. And so you often have these skill sets, whether we are accountants or lawyers or doctors. And what we find in our environment is many young women are more educated than the males, but they struggle with the courage to go and ask, to go and seek mentorship. And I can't necessarily speak to why that is, but that is one of the things that I would encourage any woman, man, listening to this episode to say, listen, go and ask somebody. You'll be amazed at how many people are prepared to help you at no cost. But most times I tell people is, even if you had a meeting with your dream example, do you know which questions you want to ask them?
Are you prepared?
Are you prepared?
Okay. I love that because I was sitting here as simple as when I met you. Right. I strongly and firmly believe God creates opportunities. If he gives you a vision, he will create an opportunity for you to walk into that vision.
Absolutely.
I firmly believe that.
No question about it.
Exactly. So for me, for my life, what I've saw how God worked with me, and what worked for me was when he gave me something, I had to have the faith to move on it. And a lot of us don't have faith to move on what God has truly said to do. Okay? And furthermore, you said something, you said more women are more successful in certain areas. And the reason being is because I believe that women are not so shy. Now, what you don't know is I have been following you for a long time, and I absolutely love the way you empower so many women in your company. And your cousin, Miss Loretta Butler,
yes,
I had the pleasure of meeting her formally the other day. And I said to her, I said, listen, I've been following you so long, woman, and I love you. I love you bad because you've paved the way for so many other women to be in the position that they are. Because realistically, some years back, we didn't have the opportunity. We didn't have the opportunity to be this great. So it took women like them, her and Miss Hannah, Minister Hannah. They had to pave the way. They had to pave the way. And what I love about them is they never, ever don't talk about their faith.
Absolutely. And I would say that that's one of the things you see with strong women. It's never easy, right? And there's this notion that, hey, well, it's going to be easy to get to success or to realize this dream, this vision. But if you look at Loretta's journey, and I'm sure she's been very public about this in terms of her journey in politics and pursuit of leadership, even in the political circles. I know that she's put that life behind her, but if you just look at what I would call the headlines of her story, not every day was a rosy day.
No.
But the reality is she is regarded, and if you go and you look at people like Glennis Hannah Martin, who you obviously referred to as well, every day wasn't a rosy day. She too pursued leadership in her party.
Yeah.
And the reality is the journey continues. And if we don't remember to continue to honor women like them and to continue to draw in and lean on their experiences, because the reality is I tell people, their Rolodex and their experiences, the stories that you can learn from any of those two individuals, and there are many others out there who have done incredible work, in my view, is really why we don't see more women entrepreneurs or people not activating their faith the way they could. Because depending on how you grew up, the reality is not every day was go do this.
No.
I recently sat down talking to a cousin of my wife's, actually, who is now at Barry University. Her name is Carissa Taylor, just doing exceptionally well. And I remember the first time we invited her to our Inspire Her event, which is when we had Shelley Oshenbo come and speak to young women in schools. And literally, she was one of many young girls who said, listen, if I didn't have this moment where she had an opportunity to meet other female examples, mentors, she would not be at Barry University. She didn't even see herself going to UB, because her reality is that she lives in an environment where mommy and daddy are obviously doing the best that they could, but they never had the exposure of university or going off to school. And so now for her to have the opportunity where she had other people who she could draw on, I mean, she got involved in like every organization that she could find. And even today was reaching out to me just this weekend about what she could do in terms of World Ocean Day, because she's now into sustainability and natural sciences. And, I was able to say, listen, why don't you go and speak to this one who now works in National Geographic, or that one who now works at this place? And that is really the thing that I find that has really catapulted her in her journey. So much so that she applied to Barry University. I remember her applying at my house. She didn't have the money, but we facilitated the same. That ultimately, for me, it cost me nothing. Because Barry gave her a full ride scholarship.
Oh my God.
And it was really because someone took the opportunity to hold her hand, to take her on the journey, and for her to see what was possible. Because her parents did not have
the means or the exposure.
And sometimes if each one of us, as we pursue these pursuits of excellence, these pursuits of casting a vision and making it plain and actually going to pursue it, if we remember to reach back and mentor someone else, then there's a real opportunity for us to continue to not only empower women, but to empower young men as well, who are struggling with this notion of self-worth and am I good enough?
I feel like it's a lack. It's a lack in the men too, because of homes, no father figures and stuff like that. So for me, I would tell them, okay, you don't have a father figure. I understand. Find a man, like you said earlier, find someone who looks like what you want to look like in the future, and ask them for mentorship. Now that's a little bit of pride, because a lot of men don't be into asking another man, honestly. And that's pride, I think. What do you think?
That is pride, but I mean, the Bible is very clear on pride as well. And I would just simply say to you that, this is a human life, right? And so I want to be cautious, not for me to make it seem like it's just so easy. Yeah, it's pride. But the reality is we have to push through pride. We got to push through our own insecurities. Every day, every leader faces that.
Yes.
But the difference is you practice overcoming. You practice this notion of, hey, listen, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. These scriptures are not intended just to be for the Bible context. These are real things that we have to remind ourselves of when we are at our lowest point. Because if we don't do that, we end up sacrificing ourselves ultimately and the generations to come. Because we did not recognize that the God we serve is real, and the Bible that we read and that we profess and go to church every Sunday is not designed just for 2,000 years ago, but designed for everyday living, even now in 2025.
Now, let's take a step back. Do you believe, now this is my belief,
Yep.
I do believe that even people in the church, as even people in the church, I feel like they are afraid of money. For me personally, I believe they are afraid of money. And again, I don't know if it's just afraid of money. I think they believe if they have to do the business part of things and also do the church part of things, at some point they feel like they may have to compromise or something like that. But I keep trying, for me, there is ways to take the business deal, but not compromise your faith. And then there's some you just walk away from, and then there's some you could, but not compromise. How do you deal with that in your day-to-day life?
Well, let me say this to you. It's very easy to struggle. I mean, because we're all human.
Right.
And the reality is business is all about integrity. And I will tell people that if you want the world to be a better place, then we need more Christian entrepreneurs.
Right.
Because the reality is, you know, we are not called to be Christians just to go to church.
My Lord, that's
and
powerful.
To sing that good old hymn that Mother told us many years ago. The whole notion of the Christian walk is to influence God's kingdom here on earth.
Right.
As this prayer says, as it is in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reality is the only way we drive that influence here on earth,
right,
is by becoming entrepreneurs, by recognizing that if our foundation, if our beliefs, if our values are aligned with His, the consequence of wealth does not necessarily mean that we just build bigger houses or taller walls.
Right.
But the consequence of wealth and the consequence of entrepreneurship is they become tools for us to empower other young people so they can see godly examples of what entrepreneurship looks like. I mean, I lived that through my sister, Junia Pinder, who ran El Shaddai Party Rentals for many, many years in Nassau Village. And I just will tell people that the purpose of money is not for us. Money is only a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we can recognize that if we have access to it and we recognize that we are only vessels for that wealth to be passed through,
right,
then we have a huge obligation and opportunity, in my view, to really be able to bring others along on their Christian journey and to be able to say, listen, you don't have to compromise yourself. Here's an opportunity for you to go to school. Here's an opportunity for you to meet so-and-so. Here's an opportunity for you to cast your vision or to write it out and to provide that. And that's why, one of the things that I think as a family we've been very intentional about, whether that's through our own podcast, is really about telling stories. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes it's through telling stories is another way of providing mentorship.
Right.
And inviting others on a journey that often seems overly complicated or that they're struggling with their insecurities. And that's why when you called and said, listen, would you be a guest? Absolutely. Because I see these opportunities and platforms as a way of sharing
the knowledge.
And providing mentorship. Mm-hmm. And providing, because maybe the person who listens to your podcast doesn't listen to my podcast.
Exactly.
Or doesn't move in the same circles. And I really hope that the purpose of telling this story today is to really make sure that people are not afraid of business as
right.
a Christian,
mm-hmm.
but recognizes that because you are a Christian, you should be in business because the world becomes a better place if you know how to treat people better, if you know how to create more value for money in terms of whatever service that is you're providing, you're going to treat people with honesty and integrity. I mean, if you think about how many people complain about the contractor who don't build, imagine if you're a Christian contractor, we don't want to do that.
No.
So I would just say to us, let's just make sure that at the end of the day, if we are Christians and we are focused on entrepreneurship, that we let our values, our Christ-likeness, not only be something that we put on the walls, but something we try to live by in everything we do. And I appreciate that's an everyday journey. That is not something that is an exact science, but it's something that we have to keep at the forefront if we're going to have better entrepreneurs, we're going to see a better world and a better economic system that allows for greater education and empowerment. And Christianity is not the only way to do that, but it's certainly a sure way to do that.
Right. I have a question for you. What would you say to the viewer who is trying to find purpose? How would you navigate them into walking and finding their purpose? How would you do that?
So I guess the first thing for me is defining what purpose is. Purpose is, what are you prepared to do and not necessarily have to be compensated for. And when I say that, it brings you so much joy. It brings you such excitement. Like you feel like this is what God is. And I'm not talking about baking cookies necessarily, even though that could be a purpose, because there's a difference between purpose and a hobby.
Right.
Because I tell people that oftentimes, whether that's cookies provide happiness. So maybe your journey is to provide happiness, not necessarily to bake cookies. Because the cookie is a means to an end. That's the point I'm making. And so you have to be careful to recognize the difference between the end state, which is your purpose, and the means to an end. Because happiness is one thing, right? And fulfillment. And this is why money doesn't bring happiness or fulfillment, because money is only a means to an end.
That's right.
And so if we are not clear about what purpose is, that thing that I am prepared to go into the community and mentor young women or young men, or to be able to tell stories that are going to have impact. Because really, at the end of the day, there are many ways that you can find to do that. But ultimately, what is driving that level of satisfaction? What is keeping you up at night? Because probably today you're going on the job and saying, listen, I done prove the money thing that I could pay my bills and I could get a nice house, or I could, rent an apartment and drive a nice car. But beyond that, there's something in you that's saying, listen, man, there's so much more. I get a passion when I could serve my community, or I get a passion that I can do. And the reality is then you often don't find your purpose until that passion is something you continue to serve, and then people are prepared to pay you for it. But the payment is never about the compensation, how rich I could get, but the payment is about, hey, listen, this is a seed that allows me to do even greater work within the purpose that I find myself, whether that's in mentorship, because when you get paid, listen, you got to often find yourself investing it right back in, okay, how can I make this into a book instead of a podcast? Or how can I make this into a signboard that every young child now thinks about, because it's about impact, not just about the actual thing that you're doing.
I agree. Now, before we leave here today, listen, I was so shocked to find out that you went to Bahamas Harvest, to be honest. I did not know that's where you went. Tell me, what do you do at Bahamas Harvest when you go to church on Sunday? Because a little birdie now, they used me to the door, do it like this, welcome to Bahamas Harvest. Well, as humble as you can be.
I don't know if I necessarily, I think Pastor Mario would be delighted if I signed up for it. It's funny enough, he's on a series on serving right now, actually. And in fact, this morning I got up and was doing my devotion, and it was all about this notion of that leadership is all about serving others, funny enough. And so while I have not necessarily done any work directly in terms of greeting at Bahamas Harvest, I can tell you that's one of the action items from his sermon in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But I will say what I have done is partnered with Bahamas Harvest on many things, including the Men's Mobilization March, where we've gone into the community last year when we had those Spring of Crimes, and really tried to work with young men to model. And we continue, so we're still trying to promote that as a means of investing in young men in our community who are still trying to find themselves. And so while I may not necessarily be active in the ministry in that, obviously I participate in small groups and I participate in a couple other things, but I'm not what I call in Sunday serving at this stage. The reality is it's a journey. That's all
maybe that's a little hint for you to,
listen.
Well, if he was preaching about it for the last 3 weeks, well, and now here I am. Maybe, the Lord is saying something clearly. But Mr. Butler, I'm so grateful for you here today. I've enjoyed our conversation, and I hope to see you again on our podcast very soon.
Listen, it's a pleasure to be here. It's been great to kick off this podcast, and I hope whatever I've been able to share has been a blessing to your listeners.
Oh, it was a blessing to me. I'm pretty sure it'll be a blessing to everyone else.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.